the first lesson is 1 page, okay? So you see why I combined it. We're going to talk about linear measure, okay? And then we'll do some midpoint and distance formula. Good? Okay. So I put this little sentence here first. What is or is not above letters is meaningful in geometry. So here's different types. We already talked about line. We have to have the arrows on the end. That's really important. The next one, bless you, is a segment. So what do you notice?
There's no arrows.
There's no arrows, right. So that means it has a definite length. Okay, so this one has a definite length to it. Versus the line we talked about goes on indefinitely, right? Opposite directions. Okay. Now, the next one. The next one is the measure. What do I mean by that? Well, it's in parentheses there. It's the distance between the points. This is really important because sometimes the students, so remember how I said yesterday I talked about like symbols and letters, it's really important. If you're referring to the geometric segment and you forget to put anything above it, that means something different. That means the length of the segment. Okay, so far, we're okay? All right, betweenness. Okay, this is a funny word. It's a real word in geometry.
It's a real word.
Okay.
If you look into the dictionary.
So point M is between points P and Q only if, one, they have to be collinear, and you have to be able to add the two segments together to equal the long segment. Okay, it seems kind of obvious, but between, so it just means like, oh, here this is 4, and let's say this is 2, so then what would PQ be, the whole segment? 6. It's not a trick question, okay? But you need to make sure that they're collinear. So if I have, you know, a point here, and a point here, this is not between.
That's collinear.
That's not between. So we can't have that apply, right? I can't say AM plus MB equals AB.
Where did the point?
Oh, I just gave an example. I just threw in those numbers. So for example, if I gave you this was 11 and this was 3, then what would the whole segment be? 14, right? What if I gave you the whole segment has to be 20 and I told you that this was 15, then what would this be? 5.
So what's
Okay.
between this?
Read it. It's right there. It's like, okay, let's do this. Let's find y. So we're going to do a little math now. Yesterday with a lot of definitions. We want to find y and QP. Notice there's nothing above the B and the C. That means the measure of that segment. If B is between A and C. Okay, so let's first look at this. B is between A and C. I'm going to draw a picture of that. Oops, sorry, I meant this one. P is between Q and R. So go ahead. I'm going to make a line segment, okay? And I'm going to put, P is between Q and R. So I'm going to put Q and R on the endpoints. Now, I don't know exactly where to place P, and it doesn't matter. You could put it right in the middle. You could put it closer to Q, closer to R. Okay, next, let's label what we know. We know the length of QP is 2y, right? I'm just reading here. QR is 3y plus 1. Okay, that's referring to the entire length of the larger segment. And PR is 21. So what do we want to do? We want to set up an equation to solve for y. Raise your hand if you have that equation, Rosie.
2y plus 21 equals 1.
Perfect. 2y plus 21 has to be equal to 3y plus 1. Okay, that's an easy one to solve. Raise your hand if you have that. You did? No, never mind. Justin? 20, yeah. Subtract. So in geometry, I'm not going to show a lot of work here. You should be able to subtract 2y from both sides to get y, subtract 1 to get 20, so y equals 20. Now we're not done. One of the things in geometry, we always want to make sure we go back, read the sentence. What are we finding? We're not just finding y, so I'm going to circle that. That's part of my answer. But I also want to find what? QP. All right, so I'm going to put QP. Well, what was QP? Or Liam?
Oh, I was already higher.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead. You can just say it.
QP equals 40.
Perfect. Good. Okay, so we had 2 answers in this case. Make sure when you're doing the homework, a lot of students will stop once they solve the variable. Make sure you go back and read it. You can also check your answer here, right? If I plug in, right, this is 20 and this is 21, does it have to equal 3 times 20 plus 1? Yeah, so you can always plug it back in and make sure it works. Okay, now we're doing this one. Find x and bc if b is between a and c. All right, you go ahead. I'm going to freeze my screen. Where did I put? I want you to try this one on your own. I encourage you, you don't have to, but if you could draw a picture, it's a lot easier. Okay, let's see. Excellent. Looks good so far. All right. Don't worry, the algebra will get harder. We'll keep it simple for now.
What does for now mean? Like tomorrow will it be simple?
Well, you know, we're going to do some factoring at some point. We'll do some proportions. Not yet. Good. Okay. Oh, fine. Okay. Did we get 15 for X and 33 for excellent? There you go. What's that? Yeah, it's a like you can almost like it's called freeze. So I can pause my screen and then I can just unfreeze it and it shows the answers. So that way I can write up the solution. You can work on it at the same time. You got 33 for BC? Good? All right.
Wait, I'm not.
All right, we are going to move on. Definition of congruent segments. Have we ever heard the word congruent?
It's like
Okay.
this, but like not touching, like this.
Okay, you're thinking perpendicular. No.
That's not it.
Okay. I want you to think of congruent as the same, something that is the same. That's okay, that's okay. When I say 2 things are congruent, it means they are identical, okay? They are the same thing. So when I have 2 segments, these are identical because what? They are the same measure, they're the same length. So I want you to note, what do you notice the difference between here and here? This one doesn't have any line segment above it. So that's referring to the actual lengths. AB is how many centimeters? 1.7. CD is how many centimeters? 1.7. So that means they are equal in length. That implies, you know, the word implies, like if this is true, then this is true. So then the segment, the actual, if I were to cut out AB and paste it on top of CD, would they be identical segments? Yes.
This equals like about.
No. A congruent sign is an equal sign with a squiggly line above it. Okay?
The thing that was like is almost equal to is like the 2 swoop.
Yeah, this is approximate. Don't get them confused. They're very different
Whereas
things.
like the computer couldn't make the approximate.
Okay. All right. Now, I always, with these definitions, I know it seems a little bit repetitive, but I want you to understand if you know 2 segments are congruent, then you know their measures are the same. We'll get to it when we do the geometry proofs, but there is a distinct difference. So that was 1.2. That's why we're going to move into 1.3. Okay. Whew. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Right, Alan, Max, we're good? All right, distance on a coordinate plane. Distance on a coordinate plane. Okay, one way to find it is, this should look familiar. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, right? Pythagorean theorem. Okay. How do we know what one is A, B, and C? What does C always have to be? The longest side. We call that the hypotenuse. You remember that word, right? Hypotenuse. Okay, hypotenuse is the longest leg. It's always the one opposite the right angle. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's plot those 2 points. We got 5, 1 right here. Here's R. And -3, -3. So here's S. Now I'm going to connect those. So I will just connect. I want to find that distance, but we can't count diagonally. That's no good, right? No bueno. So I want to make a right triangle. Well, how could I do that? I can make the triangle go like down from R and over from S to make a right triangle. Now, is that the only way to make the triangle? I could go up. It just looked like it's the same thing. You'll get the same answer. Okay, now, we know this is C. Does it matter which one's A and which one's B? No, makes no difference. So I could say this is A and B. Let's count. How many spaces go over? 1, 2, let's make sure we count right today. I know I messed up yesterday. What is it going across? 8. And what do we get for B? 4. Sounds about right. So RS. Oh, I'm sorry, not RS. Let me write this. Let me do AB. Right, this is our formula. So I have 8 squared plus 4 squared equals C squared. So we have 64, 16. And yeah.
X squared equals 80. Would you make us, like, are you going to make us do the approximate or just x equals root? Oh, and do you have to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared above it?
No, you don't have to. No.
Oh. Like,
Okay.
how do you want us to write it?
How do I want you to write it? I will tell you, I want you to be able to do both exact, meaning I want you to simplify this radical. So you probably either learned a factor tree, or you can also look at what's the largest perfect square that goes into 80. It's 16, 16 times 5. So this is going to be 4 root 5. Or if you have your calculator handy, you can plug that in and get an approximation. I want you to be able to do both. So I know, depending on what school you went to, did we do a lot of simplifying radicals? Yeah. Some of us? Okay. If not, it's your job to come see me, because this is an Algebra 1 topic, right? So if you don't feel comfortable with simplifying radicals, then come see me. So I'm just going to rewrite RS because that's what I was looking for. So I will show you.
Can we just leave it in the
on your calculator.
Oh my god.
Oops.
Is that a virtual calculator? What is RS?
Oh, so that's the length of the segment RS, right? So I didn't put anything above it. So I put RS equals 4 root 5. Now, on our calculator, I usually just operate within what's called the scratch pad. This is technically a computer. You can create documents, you could do all kinds of stuff. But for right now, if you just click this button, if you turn it on, it'll look like this. You could either press this button here, or you can just press enter to calculate. If I press that button, you see how it's in red? If I press that a second time, it'll go to a graph. And then if I press it again, so it just toggles between a graph and this part of the calculator. If I want to get a square root, I have to press the control and then the x squared button. Do you see how there's a little square root above? It's probably hard to see on the board. And then what you can do, just type in 80.
Can we, if we want, just keep it the way it is, like 4 and like 4 in the square.
Okay. I will be very exact when I put my directions on your quizzes and tests. I will say I want it in exact form, no decimals. And then there are times where I will say you can leave it as a decimal or as a radical,
So
or I want it just as a decimal. For tonight, for the homework, right? Do you see how I wrote it here? Simplified radical form. That's this. Okay. What?
okay.
For the homework, I would also like you to do simplified radical form. If you also want to put the decimal approximation, fine, but I want them in simplified radical form, okay? All right, next method, distance. Okay, some people get to distance formula, some Algebra 1 teachers don't get to it. It's the square root, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared.
We do not do that.
Do we have the
Okay.
choice to use either method one or method
called
two?
it like a different thing. Though.
Okay, so that was a good question. If I don't specify, I don't care, right? If I just say find the distance, but I will tell you on the homework, it's going to say use Pythagorean theorem for these problems, use distance formula for these. I encourage you, not just encourage, I need you to really memorize this, okay? This formula here, because you're going to use it this year, you're going to use it next year, you're going to use it the following year. It's not going to go away. So you just want to make sure that you memorize that, okay? Point slope form is going to be later, chapter 3. We'll revisit that. Quickly. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. First, I'm just going to label x1 and y1. What are those? Those are subscripts. So you say x sub 1, x sub 2. So what is the subscript for? It's really just naming the point so I don't get them confused. So if I have another point, I would label that x sub 3, y sub 3.
Why can't
If
it
I-
just be x minus x? Because it's the same
I
value.
need to distinguish because what's x minus x? 0. I don't want to have x minus
Can
x.
you just
Okay,
change it
nope.
to like
Okay, moving right along. DE. I'm going to plug in y or x2, so -7 minus -5, so that's going to become plus 5 squared.
What is that?
That's a square root. Okay, maybe I draw it a little differently than your middle school teachers, but it's a square root. Okay, next I have y2, that's -4 minus y1, that's 6, and I want to square it. Now, I should never, ever, ever get a negative number under the radical. Why not? What happens when you square something? It becomes positive, right? So I should always have a positive number plus another positive number. Does that make sense? Okay, what do we get here? Okay, so this will be -2, right? -2 squared will make that +4. -4 minus 6, so that'll be -10. Square that will make that 100. Right? So we get square root of 104. Now, what goes into 104? 4. 4 goes into it. How many times does 4 go into 104?
26.
Okay, so 26. Can 26 be broken down any further? No, so it's going to be 2 root 26. Right, again, if you need a minute to break it down, and that's fine, okay? I'm going a little quickly because I think we spent a lot of time on homework and I want to make sure we don't run out of time. I will post this screencast, so if there's something that was confusing, you can go back and watch it. I'll post it on my Jag. Good? Okay. Definition of midpoint. Okay, think about the first part of the word. Mid. It's in the middle, okay? Now, you'll notice this word between. We talked about betweenness in 1.2. What does it mean to have a point between? It's got to be collinear, and this part plus this part has to equal the whole thing. And I also want to make sure that the segments are equal to each other. So just kind of eyeball it. Look at that segment. See where you think would be right in the middle. You don't need to get a ruler out and measure it. It's fine. I'll say right here. Oh, one of the things I forgot to mention on the congruent part, when you want to show two segments are equal in length, we put little tick marks on each of them. So that shows us PM and MQ are the same length. Now, if they're equal, does that mean they're also going to be congruent? Remember, right? I asked if they're equal. Right, this implies, you can use an arrow for the word implies. That's like an actual math symbol. And we say PM is congruent to MQ. We'll get used to that congruent sign. Okay, how do you find the middle of something? So let's say I gave you two numbers. I said, okay, 6 and 12. What's right in the middle of 6 and 12? So do you really want to think, or do you want to think, how do you average them? How do you find the average of two numbers? Add them and divide by 2. So on a number line, that's the easiest way to do it. Just think the average on a number line, or sorry, the midpoint on a number line is the average of the two numbers. Okay? Because what happens when you have fractions or decimals? Do I really want to try to figure out counting spaces in between? No. We want to just add them, divide by 2. Is there a question? Did I go too far? Right there? Okay, on a coordinate plane, what's that mean? That's when we have the x and the y axis. Now, when we have a number line, you just have 2 points, right? But what happens when you have two ordered pairs? We have an x1 and an x2, and we have a y1 and y2. So what we want to do is we want to average the x's and average the y's together. Okay, so the midpoint here. Also make sure, I'm going to put on here, memorize this one. I should have put that next to the distance formula, but if you want to put that down. So this one too, memorize.
What are you memorizing?
The distance formula and the midpoint. Okay. I guess you can memorize this one at the top too. But it's just the average of two numbers. It's not anything tricky. Okay. All right, we want to find the midpoint of -3 and 7. So -3 plus 7 divided by 2. All right, just adding them together. I mean, you could think of it intuitively as well, but again, what if I gave you some fractions or decimals? You're not going to want to do that. So what do we get? 2. Okay, now we want to find the coordinates of the midpoint. First thing I'm going to do, you don't have to label them, I'm just showing you.
I don't understand. You're way too far ahead.
Okay, where, what do you mean where?
I went back to write memorize and then you just skipped forward.
Okay, I didn't skip forward. I just did example 3.
I was there.
Okay.
So
Did you get example 3?
to figure out example 3, do you do the midpoint one, like a plus b over 2?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this one we're going to add the 2. So I'm going to do big parentheses. Okay. And what do I want to do? I want to average x1 and x2. So I'm going to have a -1 plus 6 divided by 2. It's an ordered pair as my answer. So I need to have parentheses and a comma. And then y2 and y1. So 2 plus 1 divided by 2. Okay. So I'm combining, here, let me highlight. I'm combining the -1 and the 6. And then I'm combining the 2 and the 1 and averaging them. And it's okay to go to fraction. In this class, I prefer you to leave everything in fraction form, okay? If it's a decimal and it's exact, it's okay, but I still prefer the improper fractions. What do we get for the x coordinate? 5 halves, good. What do we get for the y coordinate? 3 halves. It might feel strange to leave your answer that way, but that's what I want you to do. Okay, you want to try the next one on your own? Let me freeze my screen and let's see if we...
Whoa.
Yes.
Good. Did you do this one? This one here. Yeah. No, I don't see it. This one. You see, I see this one. What about this one?
Oh, there's
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, good so far. Excellent.
Can you read them outside the car?
Did that simplify? Oh, I thought, okay. It's all good. It's fine. Good. Good, good. What'd you get? Okay. Oh, here. All right, nothing. I don't have it.
Good. Just put parentheses so it shows as a point. Awesome.
Is this too easy?
No? It's okay? All right. I think I walked around, I think everyone that I saw had 1/2 comma 10. Good. Okay. Yeah. 4 minutes.
Are we still learning?
Yes.
No, like, is there?
There's more. There's another page. Welcome to high school math. High school math classes can be a little more intense than maybe your middle school.
Yeah, we should. This is all stuff on the thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we should just study everything we've done so far for tomorrow.
Perfect.
What's
Amazing.
what's negative?
Okay. Evan, I can come back to you. I want to finish the lesson. So
Just need to answer for that.
the last one was 1/2 comma 10. Okay, but the last part of this is not, the only, I would say example 5 is probably the most challenging. So let me actually skip that and I'll come back to that at the end so that if those of you that it's still confusing can hang out for a minute. Okay, let's go to example 6. Find PR. Notice there's nothing above that's talking about the length of the segment. We're not actually looking for it because it's right there. Okay. Q is the midpoint. So what does that mean? It means these two, PQ and QR, are equal. They're congruent. Good. Any ideas on how to solve for X? Rosie?
6 minus 2x plus 6 minus 3x.
Perfect. So 6 minus 3x plus 6 minus 3x, or could we do 2 times? Oops. Okay. Right? We can double it, or we could just add it and solve. So let's do that. 12.
Why do you multiply by 2?
It's just a different way to solve it. You can do 6 minus 3x plus 6 minus 3x, or can I just double it because,
Why are there 2 of them in the first place? Whoa.
oh, so
Q is the same as
it said this was the midpoint, so if this is 6 minus 3x, this also has to be 6 minus 3x. Okay, so let's go ahead and distribute that. Right, and then we'll add 6x, so we'll get 20x. We'll subtract 2, we'll get 10.
Start your finger.
Okay, did we get 1/2 for x?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, now I want to find PR. So PR is 14x, so I'm going to substitute in 1/2 plus 2. So PR equals 1/2 of, right, 14 times 1/2 is 7 plus 2 is 9. Okay. Example number 7. Find the measure of PQ. So I put a line segment of it, but I'm still looking for the measure, so sometimes the language is a little different. Now, if Q is the midpoint, so Q is the midpoint, these two are congruent, they are equal. And so this is a little different. How are we going to, what are we going to do?
Minus y equals 2 plus 14.
Just make them equal to each other, yes.
Oh, same thing.
Okay, so I get, subtract 5y from both sides, we get 4y, add 2, we get 16. Y equals 4, don't stop at the variable. What are we trying to find? We're trying to find PQ, right? So 9 times 4 minus 2 right? Which is substituting it back in. PQ equals 34. Okay. I'm gonna go back to this one real quickly. Basically what we're saying here is we have a segment XZ. I'm just drawing a random segment. Here's XZ, and here's the midpoint. So I know Z has coordinates 2, 8, and the midpoint is -1, 6. Yeah. Oh, the EIP? Yeah. Okay. Oh, it is 3:15. Sorry, if you have to go because you have to get the bus, I'll record this last example and you can watch it. Any ideas? If you know what the midpoint is and you know one endpoint, how do we work backwards? Any ideas? Yeah, Rosie?
Will you find the difference between the first X and the second X, and then use that?
Okay, so to get from 2 to -1, what do we have to do? Subtract 3. So if I subtract another 3, what would that be? -4, right? Sorry, can you see that? -4. Okay. 2 minus, what do I have to do? 2 to get to -1, I have to subtract 3, right? If I subtract another 3, I get -4. And then let's look at this one. Sorry, guys. You're welcome. Let's look at 8 to 6. What do I have to do to go from 8 to 6? Subtract 2. We're working backwards, though, this time. And then subtract another 2. So if I have 6, subtract another 2, I get 4. So the ordered pair for, oops, not Z, for X is -4, 4. There's another way to do this algebraically. It takes a little time. Don't worry, I don't have, I think there might be 1 or 2 on homework that are like this. Yeah, we'll do that next time. Don't worry about that.
So
It's not going to be on the quiz.